Hello everybody, today I'm driving one of those cars that at launch made just about anybody and everybody in the car world go, Are they sure? This is the Audi S6 TDI. And what makes it so unusual is the fact that in the wake of Dieselgate, a great many companies realised that the public had fallen out of love with the black fuel. Porsche even decided to discontinue diesel models entirely. And yet, Audi doubled down, not only continuing to offer diesels, but instead, in the case of the S4 and S6, one of their sporty models in the lineup, deciding that where previously you could only have petrol, now you could only have diesel. And so, 5 years after this car hit the stores, it would appear that the public is never going to forgive diesel. And so today I am asking if maybe Audi made a terrible mistake, or there was just a little bit of method to their madness. Whilst doing my research for today's video, I happened upon an article which I have to say confused me a little bit. And please tell me if you agree with me or not on this one. And it said that the transition for the S6 from being a petrol-only car to diesel-only, in the European market anyway, was one that actually wasn't really that big a deal, because, after all, nobody bought an S6 for its engine. To me, though, one of the only reasons I've ever thought of buying an S6 is the engine. Look back across all the previous 4 generations of S6 and you will see a who's who of great Audi engines. It started with the classic inline-5 turbo, then became a naturally aspirated V8, before morphing into the madcap 5.2-litre V10, which even Audi themselves admit was probably taking things a little bit too far. For this car's immediate predecessor, they then went to the familiar 4-litre bi-turbo V8, but then for this decided, no, that's not what people really wanted. Instead, what they were after was a 3-litre twin-turbo V6. Trying to help the engine, they gave it an electrically powered compressor, the theory being that that would help eliminate turbo lag and allow them to fit even larger turbochargers, giving the car more impressive figures. And if you were to look at the torque, it does pretty well. This car pumps out a thumping 516 pounds-feet of the stuff. That's 700 Newton-meters. Unfortunately though, if you were to look at power, things weren't quite so good, because this car made some 100 less than its predecessor, from 450 down to 350. And for customers outside of Europe, though they did still have a bit of a downgrade from the V8 to a V6, it was effectively the same 2.9-litre twin-turbo as you got in the then-new RS4, which still made 450 horsepower, though a little bit less torque than the diesel, 443 pounds-feet or 600 Newton-meters, which I think is still perfectly adequate. Having been on the launch of the then new S4 TDI, I did take the opportunity way back when to ask Audi what on earth it was that they were playing at, and they said, simply put, that even in the wake of Dieselgate, manufacturers were still very much being persuaded to get their CO2 down, and all of the incentives for consumers, both private and business, were still based more or less around CO2 as a priority. And the simple fact was that diesels could be made to give better CO2 figures. And now, with things like AdBlue and better management and perhaps a dose extra honesty, they did actually achieve some fairly significant improvements in the technology. Meaning that, in an ideal world, perhaps people would have realised that mistakes had been made, but now rectified, and so, where suitable, they'd go back to diesel. Only they didn't. And even now, when I speak to people for whom diesel would be the ideal fuel, they just don't want it. But let's take a moment to park all of that engine talk and look at the rest of the S6 as a package, because I think it's quite a compelling one. Unlike the RS6, which was available only as an Avant, which is Audi for estate, this you could have either as Avant or saloon. But I gotta be honest, I've always had a soft spot for the estates. It is not a small car, just under 5 meters. Though it could certainly be accused of being a little bit classic Audi bland, I still think it's a pretty handsome thing. They've got the blend of curves and angles just about right, and unlike the RS6, for those who prefer to fly a little bit under the radar, it is more understated, and so might appeal a little bit more to those that liked the old RS6 and feel the new one is perhaps a little bit too try-hard. Inside it has the design language, which at the time was still relatively new, but today is somewhat familiar, meaning you've got a nice big digital display here, which I still believe is one of the best in the business, to the extent that it does allow me a little bit to overlook the center screen here, a very frustrating touch. Less so though the HVAC panel down here, also a touch screen, and to be honest, somewhat frustrating. Unlike your BMWs, the steering wheel is nice, thin, has all the controls you need, easily to hand, and behind it you will find small paddles, to be honest, exactly the same as you get in just about any automatic R8, which allow you direct control, should you wish it, of the 8-speed ZF torque converter automatic. Weirdly, for this generation of car, Audi did start to confuse things when it came to their gearboxes, because whereas previously your top-end models got a dual clutch, branded as S-tronic, and your lower-end automatics a regular torque converter, here they started to switch things around a little bit. But still, the gearbox, at least driving around town in comfort mode as I am now, does a pretty good job, as does the optional dynamic air ride. By default, the car came equipped with regular coils and springs, but this was one of many options you could have had. And this car, being a 2019, came out before Audi decided to do trim levels for their S and RS cars. Later you could then buy either the base model, you could get then a black edition or Vorsprung, and they did a few others as well. The idea being that if you wanted a fully loaded car, you just bought a Vorsprung. The reality, sadly, was a little more complicated, but that's a topic for another day. Regardless, this one is roughly analogous to the Vorsprung model because it's got the Tour Pack, the City Pack, the Parking Assistance Pack, the LED matrix headlights, which I have to say do a very good job. I've experienced them with a number of other cars. You've also got the contour lighting in here, the aforementioned air ride, 21-inch wheels, which actually don't look as daft as you think they might, because for this generation, Audi beefed up the rolling radius of the tyre. There's a nice opening panoramic sunroof, and of course all your usual refinements like multi-zone climate control, heated seats, at least in the front, electric windows all around. This one also has acoustic glazing, i.e. double glazing. There's also an electrically adjustable steering column, and this car has the perennially popular B&O premium sound, which in other markets wasn't the best you could get. You could get the nice one with the pop-up tweeters that was a lot better, but here this was the best you could have. And it's okay, but not really as good as it should be. It was, though, such a popular option that if you get the later cars or other models with the comfort and sound pack, it actually affects the residuals on your finance. Strange, but true. You even have both radar guided and predictive cruise control. So not only can it keep its distance from a car in front, but if there isn't one there, it will slow down for an approaching corner. One thing this car does without, though, is keyless entry. Apparently just not available for the 2019 model year. And there are some out there who would definitely consider that a plus. And it's a pretty nice place to be, even if in this dark Vesuvius grey, which does look nearly black, and black interior, it's not exactly inspiring. But that in a lot of ways is the exact point of a car like this. Reese bought it because he wanted something that was practical, but not an SUV, could return decent fuel economy, and on the way here he achieved nearly 47 to the gallon, but that also could do 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds. So let's engage dynamic mode, which will dial up everything in the car to its max, turn the gearbox to manual, and see if this 2.1 ton Executive Express can actually cut it on a British B road. Well, this is a bit of a pleasant surprise. You see, when you look at an S rather than an RS, there are a few things that happen. First off, the price gets a little lower. Secondly, the specification becomes a little lower. But thirdly, so do the expectations. You see an RS badge on something, and Audi have told you this is a performance car. This should be able to put a big smile on your face. But the S badge tells you it's not an RS, it's just more than, in this case, an A6. In spite of that though, this car I really quite like. Even in dynamic mode, the air ride is actually surprisingly supple. In comfort, it was perfectly fine. The engine I do have a bit of an issue with. It's constantly making fake V8 noises, which aren't particularly convincing. Even from outside, it's basically playing a speaker at you, but I can ignore that, and you can alter that. What does get me is the fact it's very, very laggy. Now, I first experienced this in the SQ7, which has a similar setup, only with a beefier, bigger V8. And I wouldn't mind quite so much. I kind of expect a performance diesel to be a little bit laggy. If it weren't for the fact that Audi spent so much time telling all of us with their fancy electric compressor technology, they've basically eliminated turbo lag. That, I can assure you, is complete nonsense. But if you can put that to the side for a moment, and I appreciate in an RS I couldn't, what you have is a car that, yeah, doesn't rev, the red line is at 5 here, but does have thumping mid-range performance. Now, I was always a little bit confused about the way the car delivered its torque, taking quite a while and then feeding it in very gradually. I always thought this was an emissions-based thing, but Reese tells me, a friend of his has told him, the truth was instead it was done to protect the gearbox, which simply couldn't cope with all of that torque arriving at once. The upside of this is that even on a day like today, when it's a little bit damp, greasy out there, and only 6 degrees, because the car has standard fit Quattro, even though the tyres aren't that broad, just 265 section, it's got plenty of grip, and it seems pretty hard to upset. Curiously, in some other markets, these cars also came with standard fit dynamic rear steer, but apparently here in the UK, it wasn't even an option. Regardless though, I can't say that I'm missing it. I'm also quite happy with the steering feel because, yeah, sure, it's not brilliant, but it is better than I think people would expect. In comfort mode, it's light basically all the time, perhaps frustratingly so, but in dynamic, there's a little bit of weighting, it's got a nice keenness to it, and it does make the whole thing feel a lot more lithe and agile than you'd expect of a 5 metre long, 2.1 tonne estate. The only time, truthfully, that it's really frustrated me is when I'm trying to turn the thing around or simply pull away from a junction, and when you're trying to make that initial movement, you put your foot down a little bit and the car doesn't really want to do anything. In terms of stopping, today I'm unlikely to really put the brakes to the test, but if for whatever reason you felt they might be inadequate, and they shouldn't be, they're pretty chunky, you could have this car with carbon ceramics. But even on the RS, those are a fairly rare option, and on an S, I think actually they'd likely put as many people off as attract them to a model, because if they do need replacing, they are, surprise, surprise, very expensive indeed. I gotta say, when that engine picks up, it does give you quite a bit of punch. It's also nice, refined, very pleasant in here. The last car I took down this test route was a first generation Range Rover Sport, which also incidentally had air ride. And yet the Audi, the sporty Audi, is doing a much better job of feeling composed than the Range Rover did. Yes, I know it's a Range Rover Sport, but let's be honest, they're not really particularly sporty, are they? Especially not the first generation. Now, Reese is the sort of person that I think many of us can relate to, who is a bit of a serial car buyer. It is rare for anything to stay on his driveway for more than a year, and there isn't much consistency between what he buys. But he has developed a bit of a fondness for Audis. The last car he had was an S8 with the twin-turbo V8, and he enjoyed that. But it was a thirsty thing to keep running, and so that was part of the reason he went for this. He bought it from an Audi dealer, got a good price on it, in fact paid less than some others being advertised privately, and benefited from the 1 year of Audi warranty that they supply, which frustratingly they do for the S and RS models, and regular ones they'll give you 2 years. That's annoying. But other than a slight vibration he noticed on the way here, which could be a bearing or could simply be something else on the wheels, the car has been absolutely fine. It's currently sat on some 70,000 miles, but to be honest, in here, feels like it's on 7,000. It's really very well put together. It's nice and quiet in here, comfortable, refined. But yet, when I find myself on a road like this, I can enjoy it. Now, earlier I mentioned the SQ7, Audi's largest 4x4, and that was another example of a car, like the S4 and the S6, where they decided, right, our customers don't want petrol anymore, what they really want is diesel. And in a 4x4, makes a lot of sense. You really need the torque, and you don't get the chance to appreciate the power quite so much. Well, I feel I should give an extra mention to the gearbox in here, because actually, it's pretty responsive, especially on the upshift. Gives you a nice change. Very DCT-like. I'm impressed with it. Thing is with the SQ7 though, after a couple of years, Audi realised that diesel isn't what buyers of big luxury SUVs wanted. They wanted petrol. So they changed it and put it back. But with the S6, they never admitted defeat. Nor the S4. They stuck to their guns. And I think they will have certainly cost themselves sales, but actually, I know for many people it's still a car you'll never ever want to consider owning just because you have to reach for the black pump at the supermarket. For American viewers, our diesel pump is black and our petrol is green. But trust me, if you are in the market for something in which you can do a lot of miles in comfort and easily, but you also want to be able to have just a little bit of fun in the twisties, the S6 TDI does make a lot of sense. And if anything, I think it makes a bit more sense in reality than it does on paper. And it's rare I could say that for this kind of car. I quite like it. How much are you going to have to pay to get yourself one? Well, still a fair amount. About 35 grand. And of course, the petrol head in me, and likely in you, is going to say, that's nice, but that's the kind of money that could get me into an E61 BMW M5 Touring with its mighty V10. But just ask Mr. Harris how that's going for him. They're not exactly cheap, those things. And if you were to look at, say, an older RS6, those are getting to be about similar money, but again, they are going to be a lot more expensive to keep running. And if you can afford that, if you're maybe doing a lot less miles and economy doesn't matter, or the odd bill doesn't matter, I'd probably still go for the RS. For everybody else though, the S6, it is just right. So, I want to say a big thank you to Reese for bringing this car out, and as ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.